Good morning, all of you. Welcome to Indian Economic Class, ODL. I am Dr. Chandrachud from Wales University. Today, we are going to discuss about Indian economic concept called theories of population. This is coming under Block 2, Unit 8. The objective of this particular unit is to make the student familiar with population theories. There are three different theories. One is the traditional theory, Malthusian theory of population, and neoclassical theory also there. It is called zero population growth theory, and modern theory, the same zero population theory, the modern version that we have to discuss today. Let me start the class. Population typically refers to the number of people in a single area, whether it is a city or town, region or country, or the world. Government typically quantify the size of the resident population within their jurisdiction using census. The process of collecting, analyzing, compiling, and publishing the data regarding the population. The theories of population classified into three categories. Number one, classical theory of population. Number two, neoclassical theory of population. And the third one is modern theory of population. There are many theories related to population, out of which the following three are famous in the theories of population. In the classical version, we are going to discuss about Malthusian theory of population. In neoclassical, it is zero population growth theory. For modern theory also, it is called demographic transition theory. It is also coming under it is a corollary of zero population growth theory. Let us start the Malthusian theory of population. The most well-known theory of population is Malthusian theory. Thomas Robert Malthus wrote an essay on principles of population in the year 1798 and modified some of his conclusions in the next edition in 1803. His theory is very simple. To use this word, by nature, human food increases in a slow arithmetical ratio. Man himself increases in a quick geometrical ratio unless want and vice stop it. The increase in number is necessarily limited by means of subsistence. Population invariably increases when the means of subsistence increases unless prevented by powerful and obvious checks. This is the word given by Malthus. What he trying to say, he concluded that population tend to overstrip the food supply. If preventive checks like avoidance of marriage, later marriage, or less children per marriage are not exercised, then positive checks like war, famine, or disease will operate. Let us start with what are the propositions made in this particular theory. This theory proposed by Malthus, it can be summarized in the following proposition. The first proposition is food is necessary to the life of man and therefore exercises a strong check on population. In other words, population necessarily limited by means of subsistence, that is food. This is the first proposition given in the theory. The second one is the population increases faster than food production, whereas the population increases in a geometric progression, but food production increases in an arithmetic progression. The third proposition is population always increases when means of subsistence increase unless prevented by some powerful check. The last proposition is there are two types of checks which can keep the population on a level with by means of subsistence. They are called preventive check and positive check. The first proposition is that the population of the country is limited by means of subsistence. In other words, the size of population is determined by availability of In other words, the size of population is determined by availability of food. The greater the food production, the greater the size of population which can be sustained. The check of death caused by want of food and poverty would limit the maximum possible population. The second proposition states that the growth of population will outrun the increase of food production. Also states that the man's sexual urge to bear the overspring knows no bounds. He seemed to think that there was no limit to the fertility of man, but the power of land to produce food is very limited. Malthus states that the law of diminishing return operated in the field of agriculture and that the operation of this law prevents the food production from increasing the proportion of to the labor and capital invested in the land. In fact, Malthus observed that the population would tend to increase in a geometric rate, that is 2, 4, 8, 16. It will get doubled in every interval of time. But food supply would tend to increase in arithmetic progression 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, like that. It is adding only some percentage of things. Therefore, the Malthus asserted the population is ultimately overstood the food supply. According to the third proposition, as the food supply in the country increases, the people will produce more children and it will have a larger family. This would increase the demand for the food and food per person will again diminish. Therefore, according to Malthus, the standard of living of people cannot rise permanently. As occurs in the fourth proposition, Malthus pointed out that there were two possible checks which could limit the growth of population. What are they? Number one, preventive check. Second one is positive check. So these four propositions is considered to be the axiom of Malthusian population theory. We will discuss the two checks, that is preventive check and positive check, one by one. The preventive checks exercises their influence on growth of population by bringing down the birth rate. Preventive checks or those checks which are applied by man. Preventive checks arise from man's foresight, which enable him to see a distinct consequences. He sees the distress which frequently visits those who have largest families. He thinks that with a large number of children, the standard of living of family is bound to be lower. He may think that if he has to support the large family, he will have to subject himself a greater hardship and more workman hours, that is labor, than that he can be in a present state. He may not be able to give proper education to the children if they are more in number. Further, he may not like to expose the children to poverty or charity by his inability to provide them. These considerations may force a man to limit his family. Late marriages and self-dependency during marriage life are the example of preventive checks applied by man to limit the family. So this is the first part. If man thinks we want to limit himself, then there is a possibility of reduce the population. The second one is also there, that is called positive check. The positive check exercises their influence on the growth of population by increasing the death rate. They are applied by nature. The positive check to population or various, and it may include a cost, whether they are arising from misery or famine, whichever be, with any degree of contribute to shorten the natural duration of human life. Unwholesome occupation, hard labor, exposure to the season, extreme poverty, bad nursing of children, common diseases, war, plague, or famine. All these things are examples for positive checks. They all shorten the human life and increase the death rate. Malthus recommended the use of preventive check if mankind was escaped from the impending misery. If the preventive checks were not effectively used, then the positive check like disease, war, famine would come into operation. As a result, the population would be reduced to the level which can sustain the availability quantity of food supply. The rapidly increasing population of England, encouraged by misguided poor Lord, distressed him very deeply. He feared that England was heading for a disaster, and he considered it is his duty to warn his countrymen in impeding the disaster. He deplored that his words. Let me say what he said in our own words. The strange contrast between overcare of breeding animals and carelessness of breeding men. This was the statement made by Malthus. This theory had been criticized in several grounds and people blamed him as an antisocial character. Let us discuss what are all the criticism made against this theory. This Malthusian theory of population has been subject to a variety of criticism. Some of the criticism let us discuss today. The first one is the population has not increased as rapidly as predicted by Malthus. On the other hand, the production has increased tremendously because of rapid advances of technology. As a result, living standard of people have risen instead of falling, and it was predicted by Malthus. It is wrong. So our standard of living is increasing over the period of time. So his prediction is wrong. That's what the first criticism. The second one is the Malthus asserted that food production would not keep pace as population growth, owing the operation of law of diminishing return of agriculture, which is not a realistic statement. The third criticism is Malthus compared the population growth with the increase of food production alone. He failed to consider all other type of production because production is not only the food, but also there are many products which has to be considered which may increase the standard of living. So this was the third criticism against this theory. Then the fourth one is there is no evidence of birth rate rising in increase of standard of living. Instead, there is evidence that birth rate fall as economic growth. The last criticism in this particular unit is Malthus gave no proof of his assertions of population increase exactly in geometric progression, and the food production increases exactly with the arithmetic progression. So these two are not increasing as is asserted. So this is the classical theory given by Robert Malthus. Now let us move to the neoclassical theory. The neo-Malthusian researchers named Paul Ehrlich brought Malthusian prediction into the 20th century. However, according to Eldridge, it was an environment, not specifically the food supply, that will play the crucial role in continuing the health of the planet of the population. In 1968, he wrote an essay about the population. The Eldridge ideas suggest that the human population is moving rapidly towards complete environment collapse as privileged people use pollute a number of environmental resources such as water and air, mainly water and air. He advocated for a goal of zero population growth. Normally we used to call ZPG, that is zero population growth, in which the number of people entering a population through birth or immigration is equal to the number of people living it via death and immigration. While support for the concept is mixed, it is still considered as a possible solution for global overpopulation. Fortunately, Malthus and zero population growth of advocates were wrong in some degree. Why? Because although the population level have certainly showed, the projection showed that the rate of increase is slowing. Among other factors, the development is more effective contraception, especially the birth control pills, have limited the population growth in an industrial world and increasingly poorer the nation. Food production is also increased as much great amount of Malthus and ZPG advocates predicted because the food production supply is not increased in arithmetic mean, it is the exponential increase. Concern about the overpopulation growth has weakened as the world's resources seems to standing up the population growth. The widespread hunger in Africa and other regions does exist, with 100 millions of people suffering with hunger and malnutrition. But many experts attribute this problem not because of overpopulation, because of lack of food, but rather than the problem distributing sufficient amount of food that exists. So this particular problem, hunger, is not because of the overpopulation, because of lack of supply. Production is there, but lack of supply is there. So the reason is something else. Another factor might have played a role in weakening the advocacy of ZPG. Why? Because the criticism by people, the color that ZPG was directed largely on the rank and mocked the racism. Because if you have mentioned about the racism, so this was the main criticism against the neoclassical theory. The call for the population control, they said, was disguising controlling the growth of their own population and thus reduce their influences. This was criticized by Kumba, an economist, in 1993. Although the merits and criticism have been debated, it may have still served as to mute the ZPG advocate. Zero population growth advocacy, it has been. Now, even today, there is a debate about these two extremes. Now, let us move to the modern theory. This modern theory is otherwise called demographic transition theory. This is also the second part of the zero population theory, but the previous one, the theory, was neoclassical. This theory is a modern theory. That is why it is renamed as demographic transition theory, which throws light on changes in birth rate and death rate, and consequently the growth rate of the population. Along with the economic development and tendencies of birth rate and death rate are different. Because of it, the growth rate of population is also different. So, in the words of E.G. Dolan, he have given this particular statement. Demographic transition refers to a population cycle that begins with fall in the death rate, continues with the phase of rapid population growth, and concludes with the decline in the birth rate. Such a beautiful statement made by E.G. Dolan. So this theory gains its importance because we have to balance the birth rate and the death rate. According to this theory, economic development has the effect of bringing about the reduction of the death rate. The relationship between the birth and death rate changes with the economic development, and the country has to pass through different stages of population growth. One more economist who called C.P. Blacker divided the population into 5 different types. What are the 5 types? High, stationary, early expanding, low stationary, and diminishing. We have categorized into 5 categories. Who is that? C.P. Blacker. According to this theory of demographic transition, the population growth will have to pass through these different stages during the course of economic development. When we are going for the economic development, the population will go in these 5 stages. We will discuss the 5 different stages one by one. In the first stage, this stage has been called as high population growth potential stage. It is characterized by high and fluctuating birth and death rates, which will almost neutralize each other. People mostly live in rural areas and their main occupation is agriculture, which is the stage of backwardness. The tertiary sector, consisting of transport, commerce, banking, and insurance, these things are which are underdeveloped. All these factors are responsible for low income and poverty in masses. Social belief and custom play an important role keeping the birth rate high. Death rate is also high because of primitive sanitation and absence of medical facilities. People live in dirty and unhealthy surroundings. As a result, their diseases ridden and the absence of proper medical care result in large death. The mortality rate is the highest among the poor. Thus, high birth rate and the death rates remain approximately equal over time, so that the static equilibrium with a zero population growth profile. In first stage, we are thinking the population is high in growth, both in birth rate and death rate, and if we get balance, it's so. Now let's move to the second stage. What will happen in this stage? This stage is called stage of population explosion. In this stage, the death rate is decreasing while the birth rate remains constant at a high level. The agriculture and industrial productivity increases by means of transport and communication develops. There is a great mobility of labor. The education is expanding. Income also increases. So because of these reasons, people get more and better quality of food products and they start generating the income. The medical and health facility are expanded. During this particular stage, the economic development is speed up due to individual and government effort. Increased use of better technology and mechanization and urbanization take place. But there is no substantial change in men. Attitude of the people is not changing. Hence, the birth rate stays the same level, that is a high level. That is, the economic development has not yet started affecting the birth rate. Due to the widening of the gap between the birth and death rate, the population grows at an exceptionally high rate, and that is why it has been called population explosion stage. This is an expanding stage of population development where the population grows at the increasing rate as shown in the figure. You can see the figure in y-axis population is calculated and in the x-axis different stages are. In the initial stage it starts increasing in a increasing rate. After that it is increasing in an increasing rate, that is stage 2, because the death rate is reduced because of the technology, medical facility, other service sector. The death rate is reduced, but birth rate is maintaining the same high level. That is why it is called population explosion. Now, let us move to the third stage. In this stage, you can see in the figure, this population stage is called faster rate. Both the birth and death rate is mitigated and try to balance each other. They try to get the equilibrium. In this stage, the birth rate is compared to the death rate declines more rapidly. As a result, population grows at a diminishing rate. This stage witnessed a falling of birth rate while the death rate stays constant. See, in the previous stage, there is an increase in a birth rate and decrease in a death rate. That is why there is a population explosion. But in this stage, the birth rate is a diminishing rate and death rate is also it is maintaining the constancy. This witnessing the fall in the birth rate while the death rate stays constant. Because of this, it has already declined at the lowest minimum. Therefore, the line will be parallel to the population axis. The birth rate declines due to the impact of economic development, change in the social attitude, increase in the facilities, and we are going for the family planning. So the population continues to grow faster because the death rate stops falling, whereas the birth rate is increasing in a decreasing rate, higher than the death rate. So in this figure, we have the three stages: stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. Initially, it is increased in a lower rate, and in the second stage, it is in a faster rate, and third one, the constant rate. In the fourth stage, the theory extended the birth rate and death rate get disturbed. This stage is called stationary population. The birth rate and death rate are both at a lower level and they are again near the balance. The birth rate is approximately equal to the death rate and there is a little growth of population. It becomes more or less stationary at a lower level. Even this particular stage is having 5 different categories. Even the fourth stage alone is having 4 different categories. Why? Because initially the birth rate will increase at an increasing rate, then decreasing at an increasing rate, and then constantly and stagnated. These are the 4 stages. So let me sum up this particular stages of population. In the first stage, high birth rate and death rate and lower rate of population growth. In the stage 2, high and stationary birth rate, rapidly declining death rate, very rapidly increasing population. In the third stage, we saw falling birth rate and stationary death rate, so rapidly rising population. In the last stage, it is characterized by low birth rate and low death rate with the stationary population at a lower level. So, in this class, we have studied three different theories. One is classical theory, second one is neoclassical theory, and third one is modern theory. All three theories are possible. Section C question is there in the semester examination. The keywords are population, zero population growth, birth rate, death rate, fertility rate, mortality rate, morbidity rate. These are the technical terms that we have used in this particular theory. And the expected question is the first one, that is the classical theory, Malthusian theory of population. Sometimes they may ask either neoclassical or modern, but probability of asking the classical theory because that is a very long period it was implemented, then people believe that that was the right theory, but lot of criticism there. In section D, there is a possibility what are the criticism against Malthusian theory. It's a confirmed question. With this, I am completing the class. If you have any doubt, you can post and you can make a comment. Thanks for watching the video. We will meet in the next class. Thank you.